Hi, it's Kirby Sommers. Today is December 20th, 2025, and we're going to talk a little bit about the so called document drop. I think we all know by now that not everything that we were promised has been released to the public, and that a lot of what has been released to the public has been heavily redacted. So I'm going to go into a couple of these things. I've also made a Substack article that I wrote years ago about one of the people we're going to dive into today, free on my Substack, and I'm including links to everything below. So I think, as you all know, and I have a lot of new followers, and I want to thank all of you who have been with me throughout the last 6.5 years. Those of you who are new to my channel here on YouTube, I read one comment that said, "Hey, I was deeply involved in a thread on Facebook, and suddenly your name popped up. And I found you, and here I am." And the feedback that I've gotten from you guys has been incredible. It's been energizing. I know I sound a little tired, but hey, this has been an ongoing story. And in order to understand the scope of this and why the public has been misled, I'm going to use a couple of words that are substitutes for other words. So, for example, misled may mean cover up. Um, I need to sort of explain that I am the survivor of one of the very powerful men uh, who belong to this group of people that work in the shadows. So, someone, let's say, who is above the JE level, who, the powerful people, you don't get to see them. They are involved in handling, let's say, the three-letter agency in the United States and the six-letter agency in the country of the letter begins with I, and there are times that we can talk about it. There are times we cannot talk about it. However, let's begin. I'm going to briefly mention that among the many things that were redacted is and it just shows you how peculiar the Trump administration has gone about the handling of something that the public is very eager to see, and about which he has made a lot of promises that have been broken. However, in 1992, Donald Trump made a cameo appearance in Home Alone 2 Lost in New York, where he gives directions to the main character, portrayed by Macaulay Culkin, at the Plaza Hotel. Now, at the time, um, in fact, I was still an S slave to somebody very close to Donald Trump. In fact, Donald Trump was able to build Trump Tower with the help of the Rickless family and a Greek shipping tycoon whose name you probably already know because I've talked about him before on this platform. He owned a hotel at the time, and but even his image from the film, and that is on the screen right now for you guys to see, has been redacted. We know that the FBI has allegedly uh, been said to have hired 1,000 people to redact images of Donald Trump, which apparently they have done that. Now, the other thing is that a lot of the files have been redacted entirely. So, this is what, if you tune in to take a look at what has been released to the public, well, here you have it, guys, a lot of redactions. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with this photograph of one of our former presidents. Now, years ago, I wrote an article. I made this article free. It's on my Substack. Again, link below. You can read it. So we see there an image of Bill Clinton in a hot tub with what appears to be a young girl. And the reason I say with what appears to be a young girl is because her face has been redacted. And we know from what the government has told us is that they're going to redact the faces of, I guess, women, children, and actually there have been boys as well who they consider to be um, victims of this ongoing, uh, really. And if you are people who follow my work for a long time, you know that it's a nonstop, ongoing, multi generational ring of abusers. And I think if I explain the article that I made free for everyone to read about Bill, I'm just going to call him Bill for the argument of just trying to keep this online. I tried to add more information, by the way, and even my Substack, which is where I keep my essays with new information that no one else has been able to unearth, and primarily based on my own experience, having been involved with these people for 8 years. Um, I wasn't allowed to update the article, except for one update, and then I tried to add another photo. However, I'm going to try to share with you as much as I can here. So we see Bill Clinton very happily enjoying a hot tub with clearly a female. Now, so while many people continue to be really surprised that the leaders of the United States and other countries have men like JE supply them with a revolving door of, let's say, um, people that do not have the age to say yes or no, and again, male and female, it's not new to me. As somebody who has ties through my own abuser and my own experience, multi generational ties to almost every single president, as well as to all leaders of the country that begins with the letter I. I'm deeply aware of the S depravity, their ongoing exploitation of the populace, their endless use of espionage, and their lies. So I begin the article that by the time he became president in 1992, Bill, the Democratic governor of Arkansas, who had begun his career as Attorney General in 1976, was already well versed in scandal. He'd been accused of the R word, was said by his half brother Roger to have a nose like a vacuum cleaner, referring, of course, to the C habit, okay, and had been in charge of the controversial air base in Mena, Arkansas, set up by Oliver North and the CIA. So I want to upload a photograph. This man is Dan Lasater. And Dan Lasater, I'm going to share information about him with you, but he is JE before JE. So in the life of Bill, he's had several JEs. Same can be said with almost every powerful person who has been outed in this. It's not just a scandal. I mean, it's clear that it's a an attempt to rewrite history or obscure it from you guys, from all of us. So anyway, one of his best friends was this man Dan Lasater, who was an Arkansas native. He grew up in poverty, and by a strange series of events, he became obscenely wealthy. Now, remember what I have said about obscene wealth and overnight rags to riches. Typically, there's something else going on that's not the front story, but that there's a deep backstory, and it's usually connected to something, um, in a way, very much connected to the rise of J.E., who was born in Brooklyn to middle class parents. They didn't have a lot of money. However, we see that he became very close to, let's say, people like Leslie Wexner, another rags to riches story, Leon Black, so on and so forth. So that these men who go from nothing to being very wealthy, very powerful, are usually, from my experience, firsthand and from my research connected to activities related to the intelligence community. In any event, his backstory, meaning Lasater, goes something like this. At the age of 19, he starts a hamburger chain in Indiana. And guess what? It takes off. He sells it, he moves back to his hometown, where he then opens the first of what would become a series of chain restaurants, and these are named the Ponderosa Steakhouse. Lassiter does this while also pursuing his love of horse racing, meaning he owns racetracks. Now, this is a rabbit hole of its own because it's riddled with illicit activities, which include money laundering and ties to the mob. However, it is via the horse racing business that Lassiter meets the Clintons. The details about how this happens depends on who you ask. In one version, Bill, his half brother Roger, and their mother Virginia, who has a really interesting backstory of her own. One day, perhaps I'll write something about it, but she has deep ties to the mob. In any event, they were all sitting at the racetrack, and this was next to Lassiter's, and they struck up a conversation, and that is allegedly how they met, at which point Virginia learns that, oh, he's the owner. Why don't you give Roger a job, since Roger's not doing very well? Well, the reason Roger doesn't do very well is because he has a substance problem, and he is a habitual liar. However, I'll continue with the story. So he goes ahead and he hires Roger to work for one of his horse stables in Florida. So I want to stop here for a second, because Florida, at the time that this was happening, was the capital of the three-letter agency Substance Transportation Cartel. We know this because Barry Seal was connected to it. And I know this because my abuser's family and another family that they were partners with, namely the Arison family. And if Arison is familiar to you, it's because you might know the name Mickey Arison, who owns the Miami Heat. Now, these two families, my abuser, who I really am concerned about naming on this platform, and the Arisons, were frankly using their businesses as fronts to be used by the three-letter agency in the United States and the agency in the place that begins with the letter I, really the most powerful intelligence agency in the world, Mossad. Okay, so Lassiter was a smooth talking wheeler dealer. He owned a Rolls Royce, a private plane, and he had unlimited access to the white, meaning, it begins with the letter C. So Roger didn't really fare very well in Florida. He was soon in debt to dealers, meaning the dealers who were supplying him with an endless supply of the C word, and he owed them $8,000. Now, he was fearing for his life. He was fearing for the safety of his family. He turned to Lassiter. He's like, you got to give me a loan. And because of Lassiter's connection to his elder brother Bill, and the fact that Bill was a politician, and the fact that they were kind of connected to the same thing, as will become clear when I keep going, he gave him the $8,000. But what did Roger do at this point in time? Roger pockets four, because he needs it to continue to maintain his habit, and he only pays back four. However, Roger is nonetheless arrested on substance charges, and that's when it was revealed, oh, well, he kept four and he paid four to his dealers. However, it's through Roger's arrest that the authorities begin to hear about his brother, Bill, and Lassiter's illicit proclivities. Now, these proclivities are the same that we find when we start looking into the JE stories that have surfaced in mainstream. So one of the authorities that was investigating is this man, Doc DeLauder. Now, there's very little about Doc DeLauder. When I was researching this years and years ago, I realized that somebody had done some heavy duty scraping of the internet. To present day, they're scraping. But there's more than scraping, by the way. There are people who disappeared into thin air. And as is the case, whenever one of these activities becomes a little public, when there's too much attention to one of these activities, be it the horrible day in September of that horrible year, in 2001, whatever activity rears its head, and people that know a little bit too much about it, there's typically a bunch of people who just simply vanish. And that's just what happens. If you know too much, you are made to disappear. However, DeLauder, who was a former Arkansas police investigator in charge of the Lasater case, confirmed that the high-flying guy used the C substance to gain S favors from little girls, meaning little girls that he obtained from the local high school. Does that sound familiar to what was happening in Palm Beach with J.E.? Yeah, it sounds familiar because it's exactly the same thing. He also used it for business deals and to influence people. Now, he didn't sell it, unlike Roger and unlike others in their circle. However, despite the fact that he only gave it away as a tool to use in order to abuse people and abuse his power, he was still arrested and he was sentenced to jail, as was Roger. DeLauder added that Lasater had huge piles of C in his office, ashtray after ashtray full. Now, this is out in the open. You walk into this man's office, and there are just ashtrays. Full. Anybody who walks in can see it, just like anybody who walks into one of J.E.'s properties could see photos of minors who are not dressed on the walls and all kinds of things, as we have come to see with the drip, drip, drip of the documents and photographs that are available now to the public. And that they, meaning Lasater and Clinton, would give this to the young girls. Now, one of these was 14 years old when she said that Lasater sent her to a doctor and put her on birth control pills. Now, these guys are not stupid. They're not using any kind of protection. These young girls have never done this before. They're sent to doctors to make sure they do not become with child, and then they are used until they outlive their usefulness. So she wrote a couple of letters that were given to Doc in order to have Lasater put in jail. And in one of these letters, she wrote, Dan Lasater was planning on using me as a prostitute to entertain his friends. Now, I have this here, and I'm going to just pause for a minute and probably finish reading what I can here. She added that she was threatened with unalivement. Again, for those of you who do not like that I have to use the word unalive on this platform, feel free to go to Fox News. Feel free to go to mainstream media. They can use any word they want. Or the so-called influencers who are not really influencers for you, meaning they're not truth tellers, meaning that they have been put there in their positions to obscure the truth from you. Feel free to go follow them because they can use any word they want and they're not going to be deplatformed. On my channel, I have to be concerned and I have to use the word unalive. So she was threatened with unalivement should she ever reveal anything. Now, this is what happens time after time after time with anyone who dares step forward. You may have heard of this before, and if you haven't, please know that it is true. In my own family, three of my family members uh, were unalived. I myself have had multiple attempts on my life. I was held hostage at knife point by a trained unaliver, trained by the three-letter agency. Okay. I managed to escape on the fifth day. I write about this in my memoir, The Billionaire's Woman, who some of you have read it. If you haven't, perhaps you might be interested in reading it. However, one of his cronies, I'm going to continue with this, that's on the article. Again, it's free on my Substack. Um, One of his cronies had told her that if she ever betrayed his trust or hurt him in any way, she would not see daylight to talk about it anymore. And in her affidavit, she wrote that she saw Bill several times, but he was never acting like a governor when I saw him, and alleged to have witnessed Bill take C on many occasions. Okay, I'm going to go back to the article. I'm going to probably remove that, and I'm going to go back to Bill at the time when this was happening with his first JE. Maybe it was his second JE. These people just have a revolving door of people in JE's position. Okay. So in 1983, when Bill once again became the governor of Arkansas, um, Lasater continued to pour money into this young, very, he was a smooth talker as well. He was very much liked. He had a lot of personality. Um, he owned a bond firm at the time. And then, so when Clinton became the governor of Arkansas, because he had won once, didn't win the following time, and then won again, very similar to Donald Trump. So he skipped one where he was not elected. However, as soon as Clinton became the governor again, he gave Lasater the like the Arkansas Development Finance Authority for the state issue bonds. So he made him the head honcho for that. And then he went a step further. He awarded him a $30 million bond. Now, this is back in 1983 when $30 million meant a lot of money. So 30 million today would be what? In excess of $1 billion to install a new police radio for the Arkansas State Police. Now, this was a perfect strategy because it placed Lasater into the position of being able to hear everything that the police are talking about, right? On their walkie-talkies, on everything, so that he could stay on top of all of the substance uh, smuggling activity in Mena, Arkansas, which was happening at the direction of the three-letter agency in the United States with the help of Bill, who was later given the position of president as a thank you. By the way, they're not elected, they are selected to become presidents of this country or that country. Now, for all of this, DeLauder was front and center. But anyone who stepped out of line, including anybody in the, if you were in law enforcement and if you stepped out of line with what the three-letter agency wanted, then you were a target. So Lasater basically said that he was on the receiving end of harassment from his department, and he was very specific. He said the Arkansas State Police. He said, I knew the reason behind this was the affiliation between the state police and the governor's office with Lasater and his business associates. And I have to use quotes over business associates because these people, as it turned out, were mobsters with connections to persons in the intelligence community. So Lasater did time the easy way. Again, if this sounds familiar, it's because this is exactly what happened to J.E. in Palm Beach. Okay. He was sent to a minimum security prison. De Lauder called it a holiday hotel. And he only spent a couple of months, several months in prison. And the day he walked out of it, Clinton gave him a full and complete pardon. Now, we have a series of people who no longer were able to breathe in the aftermath. I'm only going to name two of them. Gandhi Bau, Baugh, had been Dan Lasater's attorney. He allegedly jumped out of the window of a tall building in January 1994. His law partner also suddenly was found unalived. And guess what? They were both ruled a self-unalivement. Okay. A woman by the name of Florence Martin, who was an accountant for the CIA, and she had knowledge about substance being in Mena, Arkansas. Well, she was found unalived, but in her case, there were 3 bullets pumped into her body. As for the high school girls who claimed they had been R-worded by either one of these 2 men, some of them just vanished. Now, in the early days of my research in the J.E. case in 2019, when I was speaking with some of the victims, I heard that 500 girls just from Palm Beach, from the 2005 incident with J.E., they could not be traced by any of the attorneys. They weren't found in houses of ill repute, in strip joints. They were not in jail. They simply vanished off the face of the earth, very much in the same manner that happened in the 1980s with J.E.'s good friend Bill. Now, what I want to say is that my essays are deeply researched, as you probably have been able to determine if you've been following my work and by listening to this podcast if you're new. I put some of the top 10 as basically voted by, on my Substack, there are likes. So I selected 10 of the essays that people liked the most. I put them into this anthology collection. It's on sale right now through December 24th. I want to, at 30% off, this is the table of contents. So the first one is Devil in the Blue Dress. It is again about Bill Clinton. However, it's a different take on Clinton at a different time, and it connects to J.E. and Ghislaine Maxwell. Chapter 2 is about the New York Academy of Art and the model who suddenly found fast-acting cancer and was instrumental in something connected to Clinton. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 is Robin Williams, the actor who, again, is said to have unalived himself, and the PDF rings. So it's a combination of like Hollywood and politicians and what's going on and intelligence and so on and so forth. Chapter 4 is about Richard Gere, Bugs Bunny, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Lookout Mountain Air Force Base. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Lookout Mountain Air Force Base, that was Hollywood for the intelligence community. They had more Hollywood films and more, they were bigger than the Hollywood studios that we're familiar with. So chapter 5 is Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong's unknown past. I discovered that Neil Armstrong is very likely a paperclip baby. I explain why I believe that with receipts. That I included. And of course, my abuser's father is named there. And Playtex is named there because Playtex made the space suits for Apollo 11 and all of the Apollo flights. Chapter 6, I included because it's a very interesting essay I wrote about the psychological warfare that we experience as citizens. The original influencer, so this goes back to the 1920s, 1930s, and The Exorcist. It may sound like they're not related, but they are. And then chapter 7, I included something about Rachel Chandler, who is connected to all of this, and many of you have called her the child handler. In chapter 8, I dive into J.E., Gerald Ford, Ian Fleming, um, and an unalivement. However, also included in this chapter is something on Johnny Gosch. All right, chapter 9, I share that Morgan Fairchild, the actress, who was also in the TV show Friends, sitcom that many of you may remember, and J.E. were very close friends, and I share how she was a child actress, and I share her connection to something very bizarre with John F. Kennedy. In chapter 10, I share again J.E. and the horrific thing that happened for one of his birthdays when he was given a gift of triplets who were only 12 by Jean-Luc Brunel. Now, I have been writing book after book. This is the government's not going to tell you what's going on. You might be better off getting one of my books. I have most of them here. I've got a 2-volume book on Leslie Wexner. The Gerald Ford book connects to MK Ultra. It also connects to a lot of the unusual women that we see paired off with these very powerful men. It includes almost everything that mainstream media or even alternative outlets don't cover, and or you can join me on my Substack and my newsletter. Now, this is just one of the first podcasts that I will be doing on the new developments, meaning the new documents that have dropped, the new faces that have dropped. There's information on Michael Jackson, whose photo also appeared in the new drop of yesterday, meaning December 19th. However, I'm going to be putting the Michael Jackson information, on my Patreon. So for those of you on my Patreon, stay there because I'm going to be doing that within the next day or two. And I'll be including how I know so much about Michael Jackson. And by the way, for those of you who are unaware, one of J.E.'s victims married a man who worked with Michael Jackson, and one of my abuser's best friend, John Landis, produced Thriller, which was Michael Jackson's breakout monster hit, literally monster hit. In any event, I want to thank you for being here. I want to ask you to please like and subscribe. And again, the links to all of this are below. Happy holidays, everyone. Till next time. Bye.